Let's get some more analysis. We can speak now to Pierre Cannet, who is an advocacy director for the World Wildlife Fund in France. Pierre, you're currently in Montreal. You're there for the COP15 summit on biodiversity. How significant would you say this move by the European Union is, in fact?
This is actually a historic deal that can also have an echo here at COP15, the COP that is to address the issue of biodiversity loss. And we have, through this historic deal at the EU against deforestation, a strong signal sent to the rest of the world that one major market worldwide has decided that no more products would be sold related to deforestation would be sold on EU markets. This is very strong in a context where delegates and parties are currently negotiating a new framework to preserve and protect biodiversity within the next decade. So I'd say this historic deal needs to also be echoed here in Montreal to make sure that we address the question of footprints, consumption and production footprint in the next agreement to protect biodiversity.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it sends out a strong message. But in terms of the mechanics of it and how it works, quite difficult to enforce, isn't it?
Well, it will need to be enforced. There are some sanctions, traceability and due diligence. All of that has been addressed during more than 2 years with all studies and reports. WWF also published and was able to influence the discussion, proving that this will be feasible through satellites observation. Geolocalization will be needed for every product. And of course, it will require from corporates and companies a stronger traceability through all the supply chain. So this is also a message sent to companies that will need within 18 months to be ready to implement this new EU regulation. So this is feasible, but of course, companies will need to put in place all the traceability needed through all the supply chain. And we have the tools today to apply it.
Give us a sense of the scale of the problem of deforestation around the world. I mean, I had a statistic there that millions of hectares have been destroyed over the last 3 decades as a result of agricultural farmland clearances and so on in the forest. But could you give us a bit more detail?
This is dramatic to be able to understand the problem. It's every 2 seconds we have a football field being lost in terms of forest all around the world. And unfortunately, these forests are like primary goods for and public goods for the future of humanity in terms of biodiversity and climate as well. So the main drivers of deforestation are mainly agriculture and the products that, like in the EU before, we imported without knowing whether there was or not an impact on forests and ecosystems, like whether we speak of soy, coffee, beef, all these products are related to deforestation. And we've seen also in the last years, acceleration of deforestation in some clear forest zone and areas like in Amazonia, which is actually also a message sent through this new regulation that we have an incentives in Europe to play in the producers' fields and to play on this side also of the chain to say, please develop and make sure that your agriculture is directly developed in areas that are already degraded. And this is also a message to send we have enough lands, degraded lands now, to supply the world in terms of food, for instance, and these commodities.
Which countries are perhaps performing the worst in this regard? Which are the culprits when it comes to the worst of the deforestation around the world today?
So the issue is regulated in terms of deforestation through specific powers with trade companies. And the traders have a huge responsibilities as they are in between within the supply chains, producers and consumers. So the traders will have to act, and it's a little group of companies, a big also entities. We have in the supply chain responsibilities of producers in terms of soy, palm oil, where in these countries, mainly tropical regions, there is a huge production of these goods. But the responsibilities, I would say, is not only from the producers, it also comes to the consumers. And this is another message sent by EU with this regulation saying, we have also a responsibility. And EU was secondly ranked in terms of responsibilities. We proved through a report that EU was second ranked globally in terms of importation of goods that are related to deforestation. China is first, and then comes Japan, the US. So the fact that today EU concluded this historic deal will also influence these regions, whether we speak of China, US, Japan, or the UK, they will need to pass domestically these kinds of regulations.
Okay, and until it's put in place, this new legislation, I mean, if someone's watching now and wants to know how they can be a more responsible consumer and avoid certain products, perhaps at the supermarket, what sort of advice would you offer them?
Well, in terms of advice, the first thing is to change your diets. If you rely a lot on eating meat you have for daily consumption, you will need to perhaps less frequently eat meat, because meat is directly related to the importation of these commodities that are directly linked currently with deforestation. So diet is something very key. You can change it. It's not going to change a lot of things in your life. You can replace meat by other proteins that are vegetables. And so you have the ability in terms of health also to change these diets. You have also traceability, for instance, for wood products. You will see on furnitures, whether it's FSC or not. FSC is a certification and logo that will help also in terms of procurement to make sure that this wood is not unsustainable. And this is also a logo that needs to be seen when you're a consumer. But beyond that, and that's why this deal is important, beyond that, we don't have so many traceability. So you may take some palm oil products, chocolate, cacao, without knowing whether or not this product is related to deforestation or degradation of ecosystems. And this is why we pushed so much in the last years to get this EU regulation, because a lot of burden, you have as a consumer saying, okay, you're going to change the world. It's important as a consumer to act responsibly, but sometimes it's not visible. And this is why this law will help consumers in the next months. And the other message is to say to corporate and companies to implement it as soon as possible, not to wait the 18 months. Put in place in the next weeks the traceability, the tools that are needed to make sure that your products are not related to deforestation and degradation of ecosystems.
Okay, Pierre Cannet, Advocacy Director at the World Wildlife Fund. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us there from the COP15 in Montreal.